Hey, everybody. Thanks for coming out again to another On This Day in Canadian Military History live stream. This one is a very interesting one. It's a very personal look at the First World War from a Canadian soldier's perspective. And it's more than that, but we'll get to that in time. But excited to have uh, Heather McBriarty on the channel. She wrote this book. There's links to it in the description to buy it in the US, Canada as well. The Canadian link is an ebook. Get that out there now. Highly suggest you read it because it's a great read and how it brings personal letters and the bigger context together and something very personal to Heather, which we'll get into. But anyway, so check those out. Also, please, if you can or haven't done so, please subscribe to the channel. I need as many of those as I can get right now, especially to keep things moving on the channel here. So thanks for joining me tonight, Heather. I really appreciate you coming on to talk about your book and kind of everything behind it. So I'm really looking forward to this one.
Thank you, Brad. Happy to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have this perspective, like I said at the opening there. It's something different, something I haven't really seen like this. I've seen similar volumes and collections of letters, but nothing like this story. Often it's from a different perspective. So I was just wondering if you can kind of give a brief talk about just about the story of what the book is, and then we'll follow that up with how you kind of got here to this point.
So the letters that make up the bulk of the book, I say I only wrote half the book, or I didn't even write half the book. Jim Johnstone wrote probably 2/3 of the book, and they were letters to my grandmother. Before she knew my grandfather, obviously. And they were school chums, and they started corresponding to each other before the war. And when he went off to war, he continued the correspondence, and she kept these letters, and she saved them all her life. And when I saw them, I knew it was a story that really should be told. He was a young man that needed to live again in the world, put it that way. So my part of the story were just questions that I asked myself. I wonder what he was doing. I wonder where he was. I wonder what that meant. And kind of my narrative part was just, I was answering my own questions about Jim and his experiences.
Yeah, and I think that's a great way to do this because, well, that's what historians do, right? You're just asking a series of questions, kind of setting a course for yourself, and then kind of seeing where the things take you. And I think you did a great job with that here.
Thank you.
Like you keep saying, you're a little nervous to come on. I keep telling you don't be, because the way you've done this book, this collection is astonishing to me to see it in this way. I mean, historians harp primary sources, right? Like that's the big thing, right? And this is largely, like you said, primary sources. But the way you've woven all this stuff together, I know there's some historians who couldn't do this, to be honest. So it's great to see this in this way. And I think it just, like I said earlier, I think I said earlier on Twitter, maybe today, the other day, it weaves these things together in a way that it makes most sense, at least to me reading it and having been studying this stuff for years. It makes a good sense. So with that said, I was wondering, can you explain how this comes about? Because you talk about in the book a little bit about how you came to this story. And I wonder if you could just give maybe a little more detail than you do in the book about how you came to know this story and came to write this book.
Well, the letters sat in my uncle's basement. My grandmother died in 1967, and obviously my uncle took all the family correspondence. He took all the family letters and photographs, and they sat in his basement. And at age 98, he wasn't able to live at home anymore. So my cousin, and he was living out on Vancouver Island. My cousin actually emailed my sister, who's the family genealogist, and said, "Do you want these old family letters?" So my sister said, "Sure, I'll take them." And this box arrived. And the next thing we saw was this picture on the family Facebook page with "Dearest Chiquita." And it was like, what is that? My grandmother was not a Chiquita. She was a very formal, prim, proper kind of lady that, as far as I could tell. So I said, I've got to read these letters. So I went to her house and I started reading these letters, and they were all out of order. I was just sort of picking random letters, and it was like, who is this Jim guy? Because that was not Granddad. But it was just, I just see these little things. And, my father had a Lee Enfield rifle. And when I saw Lee Enfield, it was like, oh, cool. My youngest son was doing a degree in history with a focus on military history. And I went, oh, he'll love to see this. He's fascinated. He actually got to fire a Lee Enfield. He was very happy. So I said, can I take the letters home? And she was like, go ahead. So I took them home and I put them all in chronological order, and I started reading them again for the second time. And it was just an absolutely fascinating story. It was sort of, I realized then this is a guy who went over right at the beginning of the war. He was with that first group of Canadians who went over. He was in the first training group. He was over, and there was one of the letters, and in little tiny letters, I think it was dated 21st of April 1915, and in my grandmother's handwriting is Ypres on it. And I went, I've heard of this Battle of Ypres, and it was sort of a big deal, I think, and I really knew nothing about it. So, I had gotten my father's World War II military records. So I knew that there were First World War records online. So I went and I looked Jim up. And, you don't get very far through the record and you see, killed in action. And it was just, it was kind of instantly heartbreaking because I almost felt like I knew him. Just from he's so personable, and anyway, so I went, I need to put these together in a book. I need to learn more about the First World War, and that's when I just dove in and started researching. And within a very short time, it's like, oh, Battalion War Diaries, cool. I'm going to read this. And I stumbled upon the personal diary of Colonel David Watson, and wow, this is really interesting. And then it kind of became an obsession. And next thing I know, I'm spending 3 months trying to figure out where Jim was at the Second Battle of Ypres and trying to trace his exact movements. And, anyway, then the book happened. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, there's so much here. Like, that's why it's hard to talk about the book in that sense. I don't want to give some parts of it away because to me they're ultimately they're so touching, the way he carries himself and through the letters. And the historian side of me is like, he planned this as a historian, the way he wrote. Like you said, he's part of the first contingent. He enlists very early out west in Edmonton, I believe. He's one of the first people at Valcartier, which is, I mean, you hear all kinds of legends and stories about this place, but he's documented it in so many ways. And you hear about you always hear secondhand about all the things to do with Sam Hughes and the equipment and all of that. And he's confirming a lot of this.
And what I found interesting, there was a funny little letter from Valcartier, and he's talking about the motion picture tent burning down while he's writing this letter. And then I picked up Canon Frederick Scott's book that he wrote, his memoir, and he talked about it in this book. And I was, okay, all of a sudden I had all these little tiny offhand comments were being confirmed in other records, and it became a detective. I think that's a
good way to put it. Sometimes I think about it that way. I think, or to me, it's a bit like detective / kind of lawyer, because you're trying to find stuff, and then make an argument, usually an academic case. But anyway, so yeah, like that's just the way that this is. It's like I said, these letters and the way you've presented them are great in the sense of it's very linear, and these dates. I mean, you mentioned Valcartier, the burning of the tents, where they're doing the movies where kind of soldiers are getting ripped off and they're not so happy about it, and all of a sudden the tent's on fire, but he's still calmly writing a letter.
Yeah. He was well out of it. He was not a troublemaker by any means, obviously.
Well, I just like he's in eye shot of, I don't know, this fire breaking out. It's like, yeah, the tent's on fire. I mean, that's another thing about that I found was so touching about these letters is kind of the humor that comes through in a lot of ways. So he must have been somewhat of a humorous guy, or he just kind of had a deadpan personality, because he's talking about, the tent's on fire. I'm gonna keep writing. I don't care. Like, it was just so funny, and but yeah, he's very like you said, he's not a rebel. He's following the rules, because there's all stories about people sneaking out of Valcartier to go wherever. He talks about that, saying, he
did sneak out once. He and Murray snuck out past the guards and went swimming.
They went swimming. Yeah.
They went swimming. Oh,
rebels, right? They went out. It's just so funny that he's talking about this and kind of not in a judgmental way of the other soldiers, but just being like, oh, it's not really for me. It's not really my thing. But he's like, yeah, we did that one time, and it was easy. It's just so funny because he's relaying all these details. But anyway, so the Valcartier part to me is fascinating. I mean, a lot of people don't like the training stuff. I obviously like all of it. So to me, that part stuck out because you don't see that very often. And one of my interests is training of the First World War, because my great-grandfather served and he was a conscript at the end of the war. So all he did was train. He never saw combat. So I'm like, okay, he was drafted, but what was he doing?
What was he doing?
So I love to just any insights I can get about any of this. It's amazing. So to hear about Valcartier at the beginning and all these things about Sam Hughes, like I already said, but then kind of this, how to say, this disappointment when he's not part of the first group to go, or that is selected to go at first. That's kind of heartbreaking to him in a way, right? Because he's like, I want to get going.
He was so eager to get over there, and I found it very interesting. He was, he had heard rumor that the possibility that first contingent would be sent home that first Christmas of 1915, and he didn't want to go. As much as he wanted to go home and see her, and he missed Nova Scotia, he really felt it was his duty to stay, and he wanted to stay, and he didn't want to be on home guard. He wanted to be fighting in the trenches.
Yeah, which is so. I mean, I've seen that other places, but he's talking about that. He's like, yeah, I could use a break, but not a long break. He doesn't want to seemingly get away from what he's been doing. Yeah, and kind of because he talks about it well, and I will probably come back to this, but how much training he undertook, because as you piece together, he wanted to join the Royal Flying Corps.
I think so, yeah.
But based on everything of the letters and all the censoring, right, that doesn't necessarily come through. So again, kudos on you for kind of connecting all these things. Like he's just trying to show that he's someone to be picked, someone who's kind of standing out. And based on, again, just the way he describes things, again, to me, are just so nonchalant. It's like, yeah, we're at the end of a sap under the German mine that we're countermining, and I'm listening to this. As he's writing a letter.
I think that's my favorite letter of them all. It's just, he's down in this trench, God knows how deep underground. He's listening to Germans. And, I'm going to pick up a pencil and paper and write a letter to my girlfriend at home. It's
just like, so I guess, but that's what you got to do in these situations. You can't just do what you can. I mean, he describes literally being squished next to another guy in this end of this sap trench underground. You're like, I'm writing a letter next to him in this by candlelight while the Germans are there. We can hear them speaking German. So we
can hear them cocking their guns.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
It was just like, holy man.
I'm like, I think something's about to happen.
Yeah.
But then he never talks about any of that stuff. So anyway, so they go to Valcartier. He goes to England. Again, we get this perfect, almost, it's not the right word, but perfect story, how it's laid out. Get the Valcartier stuff. They go to England. He talks a bit about the journey across and kind of how there's not much going on. Takes a while, longer than they expect. But then
I think there's a letter missing. Then
Yeah,
maybe talk more about the journey over, because he said something about passing a letter to a Boy Scout, and
right. Yeah, and that one is
that letter wasn't in with the other one, so it
right.
probably got tossed, and the kid took the money and bought himself candy or something.
Probably.
Yeah.
Yeah, probably. I mean, there's lots of Canadians around just literally throwing money around at points, right? When they landed. So it probably is not uncommon for that to happen. But
They threw around money, they threw around their buttons, they threw
yeah.
their collar badges. I just, like, the quartermasters must have been furious.
Oh yeah.
It's like, I'm missing all my, oh dear.
It's just then talking about the reception, like you said, like they're all cheering and welcoming them, and then it kind of gets a little frosty with the lack of discipline. I mean, that doesn't come through in this story really, because again, like we said, he's kind of a rule follower. Again, it's not that's a bad thing. I'm a bit like that myself, but he's not, one of those ones brawling in pubs and staying out over curfew and all these kinds of things. Like, again, he talks about in his letters, like, oh, it's time for lights out, I have to stop. Like he's going to get in trouble or something. Like,
he was kind of straight. He came from a very well-to-do, prominent family, and it was probably drilled in him from day one not to damage the family name. So that's what I assume.
Yeah, I mean that makes sense to me. And I mean, again, the way that these families are connected. But again, I want to talk about that towards the end, if that's all right.
Okay.
Because I think that the way you did it again wraps up the story quite well. But then they get to the Salisbury Plain, and for those of you who don't know about Salisbury Plain and the first Canadian contingent, it's awful conditions. Like you say in the book and your own research into this, it's some of the worst weather they had in that area in living memory. I think is what is often said, and it's just awful. Like, and it's a training camp, but it's prepping them in a way indirectly for the trenches. And you do talk
didn't
about
realize it, but they were getting a taste of what they'd go through in the trenches for sure.
Yeah, because again, that's talked about, and he talks about moving around a bunch and all these different camp rumors that fly around. But also, what I found interesting and was interesting enough for him to know is the New Zealanders are there. And I guess he wanted to go hang out with some of them, could maybe learn from them because he seemed like that kind of guy. I'm not sure if you kind of came across that more, but he talks about how they leave. And then, as we know, that leads to the Anzac Corps and Gallipoli and all that stuff. But the way that I don't know, I'm just so amazed the way he like pops in and out of these big stories. And to him, it's just like, oh, I get to meet some new people.
Yeah. I think he was very friendly. He talked to the old guys in the villages, and I think he just liked to meet people and talk to people. And, that's what comes across to me is, he made friends easily.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it seems like he was I mean, we're jumping ahead, but you included in the book is the notice in the newspaper after his death in February of 1916. There's a newspaper in Halifax that prints about his death and how popular of a man he was. And he hadn't lived in Halifax at that point for 3 years or something like that. So it's so interesting that the impact he made on the community. Yeah,
that was my great-grandfather was the editor of that paper. Interestingly enough.
Right. Yeah, that's right. I forgot about that part. Yeah. That's really interesting. So, and the one thing I think, like you said already, this big name that popped out to you when you're reading this, and it was in your grandmother's handwriting, is Eep. I knew that was coming, obviously, based on everything I do. But I just wonder if you could talk about what that was like for you. Maybe you said, because you said you didn't know this stuff so well. So, like, to me, it's like, I'm looking for that date. Like, where is April 22nd? When is this coming? Like, I knew this is coming, but what's going to happen? So I just wonder if you could talk about your experience and kind of looking at that a little bit.
Well, it didn't really mean anything to me when I first read it. But then I read that little pink card that he sent immediately after the battle. And that too, like that's stained. It's stained with dirt and muck. I don't know what's on it, but it was such few words, very terrible battle while it lasted. And, Jim didn't really talk up to that point, didn't really talk about the hardships, the bad things, but but those two comments of his, very terrible battle while it lasted, and everybody behaved splendidly.
Mm-hmm.
That really kind of jumped out at me. And I mean, I was aware of the Second Battle of Ypres, very, very surface awareness. You know, I was not interested in the war, but I'm interested in history. So it was on my radar. And then I started, okay, I want to find out about this battle. And I started reading. And I actually, what I started reading was, oh God, I've got the book right here, I think. I can't find it. I can't find it. Oh. Anyway, it was one specifically about the Canadians at Ypres. But the other thing that I downloaded was Colonel Nicholson's his 1964, was it?
Yeah, 64. Yeah, the official
64.
history.
Yeah, the official history, and started reading that, and that was kind of like jumping in the deep end of the pool, put it that way, for somebody who doesn't know much about it. But but I started kind of just picking threads out, and it was sort of like, okay, this was a huge event for Canada. It was a huge event for Jim. And it should be on everybody's radar. Mm-hmm. So when I was writing the book, I said, well, I've got to do a summary of the Second Battle of Ypres. How's that for being kind of innocent?
Yeah, I know. It's not easy.
So I've got battlefield maps. I've got, all this stuff, and I don't really know what I'm doing, but I'm learning as I'm going. And I start writing, and I got to 6,000 words. And I realized I was only 12 hours into the battle, and I went, okay, this got to back out of this. Mm-hmm. And that's when I just kind of focused on where was the 2nd Battalion and what were they doing. Mm-hmm. At the same time, my sister sent me an email and said, our great uncle's photograph album has been downloaded onto, I'm just trying to think what it is now. Some museum's website had all his grandchildren had donated his photo albums to the museum, and they scanned them, and they're all online. So I was able to go through. This was sort of a little side thing, not related to the book at all, not related to the war. I'm looking through, there's pictures of my mother when she was a kid, and this and that. And then there was some photographs of my great uncle's classmates. Mm-hmm. And there was one there, and it said Dingle Bell was the guy's name. Obviously, Dingle is a nickname. And underneath it said, killed in action, Ypres, 1915. Mm-hmm. And I went, wow. So I looked for him, and I went, okay, I'm going to put, do some digging. And sure enough, Lieutenant Andrew Bell was in the 10th Battalion. He was at Kitchener Wood at the exact same time Jim was. Now, Bell was killed in the early morning of, the 23rd of April. So just all of a sudden, this from both sides of my family, there's a connection to Kitchener Wood. So I became very interested in that battle after that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how you can't not. I mean, yeah. And yeah, like you said, we hadn't talked about you writing about that, but I'm like, I already know where this part's going to go, because I've been down that rabbit hole myself, or that path where this battle just takes you in. Yeah. Because of everything connected to it. Again, for those who might not be aware of Second Ypres, it's the first use of gas on the Western Front anyway, and in mass use by the Germans, and the Canadians are there, and they shore up the line. I mean, again, I'm just giving a brief summary because it's not really what we're here to talk about, but why this is important in this story, to me at least, is it's Canada's first battle. Yeah, they've been in the line, but this is a battle. This is the big one. And you get this sense from the letters anyway, that it doesn't seem like that big of a deal, but it is. And to me, it's those things. Sometimes you got to look through what's not there. And he does talk about this. He literally does talk about the gas attack, the first one. You can see it, which is, you don't get many accounts of that, which is so interesting. Or
I find it, he's very understated, and oh, I got shot through the clothing 3 times.
Yeah, there's that understatement. Yeah, he got shot twice in the back or through the back.
It hit his entrenching tool. It was like his war would have been over right then if not for the entrenching tool.
He's like,
knocked him out for a while. Oh, no big deal, but
he's like, I'm good.
Yeah.
I got up and we went. I was told to retreat, and we're good.
Shake it off.
Yeah, but I mean, just his description of the gas and what's happening, and what the Canadian troops do at Second Ypres. I mean, it's like, it's so confusing, and we probably are never going to fully know what happened and all of that. So trying to trace one person in all of this is nearly impossible.
Yeah.
I mean, people have tried to do it for, Arthur Curry, the big name, and they can't do it because even he's all over the place. So it's crazy. But I mean, again, this is why I think this book is a must read to me. And now I'm going to include this in lists and stuff because I'm just I've never seen anything like this. Again, and for those watching, Heather did not tell me to say that. I did. Sure, I did. Came to that conclusion all on my own. But I mean, it's just, like I say, I'm just so amazed at how this kept going. But anyway, so Second Ypres a big one. His first taste of combat in that sense, and he just kind of keeps writing as he does. He just keeps writing, no matter seemingly what the circumstance, what's going on. He just keeps doing it. I mean, he reports things like rumors, as we talked about, but it's really interesting. And then I don't know, because you've included some of the pictures of the letters, but you talk about at the end how his writing starts to change.
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask about that for here. Did you notice anything? Around this time, the letters change at all? How they even look, like the handwriting or anything like that? Or is that more of a long-term thing?
Yeah, it was sort of. I kind of noticed a few things that he talked about. He was joking around how when he got home, if he heard, a car backfire, he'd probably wind up jumping into the bushes. And that's reactivity. That's, he's joking about it, but I think he was somewhat serious, and you can see his not so much his mood, but his optimism kind of drains away a little bit, I think. And yes, his handwriting, at the beginning is very neat and tidy. And, even he's writing this, letter in this beautiful handwriting. And it says, please excuse it, written under difficulty, shells are going over now and then, but his script is beautiful. And, it looks like he's in the classroom writing it type of thing. But it does get kind of, I think maybe he's more rushed. He's towards the end. He's, it's bigger. It's kind of messier. It's not as neat. And I do really think that, maybe he wasn't classically shell shocked, but I think he certainly, there were some elements of PTSD there. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, it certainly seems that way.
It's his last letter, his whole mindset is, it's just like he's really down. He's really down. But then you can kind of sort of feel him pulling himself up and just, I've got to remain cheerful, and I sort of think that, but
he seems to have this. Again, I feel like he might have been just kind of a cool guy to hang out, but because I think we might have had similar ways of looking at things. Like, he's very optimistic, but then he's like, the Ross rifle sucks, or he's like, oh, I can't wait to talk to you again, or whatever. Oh, this trench sucks. It's full of water. Like, you could go between these two thoughts.
But then he's like, oh, the Germans have it worse than us. Their pumps are going to,
Well, which is also surprising to me because that's not something you often hear, right? You often, which I mean, again, every part of the Western Front is different, but
Mm.
you often hear like, oh, the Germans, they have lovely trenches and they make, they're so homey, and the Allied and British trenches are garbage.
Mm.
And he's like, theirs is worse. Like we can hear their pumps.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
And which it was something I want to kind of move to next, because during the time that he's serving is the Canadian, or at this point, the First Canadian Division
Mm-hmm.
is its war at this point is centered around Ypres.
Mm-hmm.
And if you haven't been there, I recommend going just because it's a great place to go. But this is Canada's war at the beginning. This is where it happens. That's where Second Ypres obviously happens at St. Julien and all the different places. Again, it's crazy. And then they're there for a good chunk of time, and then they move away, then they come back, right? Passchendaele. Mm-hmm. So again, it's an important part of Canada's story, but it's a part of, as you say, Jim's story here, because he talks about it a little bit. He talks about how the city has been bombarded. He talks about Cloth Hall, which, for those of you who don't know, is that if you ever see any sort of tourism or any photo from the war, that's the big building that got destroyed. And then
I have my grandfather's photograph of the Cloth Hall taken in 1919.
Yeah,
which is why I kind of recognized Ypres, because my grandfather I have his photographs from then. So
yeah, and it's amazing to see those like during the war, after the war, and then it slowly gets rebuilt. But anyway, yeah, like again, because you said Second Ypres and everything, I was just wondering, was there more about kind of the terrain, or because he talks about the people a lot. I was just wondering more if there was more that didn't, or you had to cut for whatever reason.
No, all the letters are in the book. So
yeah, I mean, I don't even, because I asked you before we came, I'm like, how many were there? Because I kind of got lost in it in that sense. You don't really, I'm not tally counting, right? I'm just like, I'm into this. I'm like, let's go. I want this story to keep moving. I want to hear more. So it's just, that's a big part of it. But it's so amazing that the things he focuses on. So kind of at this point, I did want to ask, because it's a central part of this, it's literally the purpose of what you've done and why this happened is your grandmother. And these are just letters from Jim. There's nothing from the other side. Now,
I mean, her letters probably wound up in the mud, and he wouldn't have kept them. They just,
yeah, it would have been too difficult. Well, and as we know, he was killed. So even if he was hanging on to them, they probably were caked in mud anyway, and they would have tossed them.
Yeah.
Because I've seen those records on, I didn't go through, I didn't want to, but I don't know if I mentioned this already, but Jim's service file there's a link below, and his commemorative page from Veterans Affairs. I found all that, and you can check it out after, or if you're watching later and you want to learn more about this and the book, that's a good primary source to look at because it's all digitally available. But anyway, so I've seen numerous ones of those who were killed and gone through the, kind of the, what they call it, the estates part of this, with what their effects are left. And letters were usually in such bad shape, they just tossed them. So that kind of leads me to a question. And again, this is only going to be based on your experience, but we don't hear really much about your grandmother in any of this. I know she didn't talk about Jim at all, from what you said in the book. Does she talk about anything about the war or her experience or what it was like? Or?
Well, I mean, I was 2.5 when she died, so I didn't really know her. But I still have letters that she and my grandfather exchanged. And interestingly enough, in my grandfather's letters, he talks about Jim. He knew about Jim. She told him about Jim. And he acknowledged how important Jim was as a part of her life. So, he wasn't kind of hidden away. This wasn't a big secret in her life. So, I mean, that's part of, kudos to my grandfather. I mean, he could have been very jealous of this man that she was very much in love with. But, he was big enough not to be upset with it. And didn't throw out her letters because she died first. He could have chucked all those letters. But so, unfortunately, I don't have any of her impressions of the war, or other than generally in these letters, it was a terrible time. It was a difficult time for them, and that I think it was important for her that Jim's memory stayed alive. Now, what is interesting is some of the letters that my grandfather wrote to her before they were married, when they were, she kind of friend zoned my grandfather, actually. And so he was writing to her, but some of the letters are addressed to Jim's father's house. She was staying with Jim's parents, off and on. Her own mother was hospitalized, was sick, and so she kept that contact for many years. Actually, Jim's mother thought my grandfather was great, and she was happy they were getting married. My great grandfather hated my grandfather. So anyway,
these things happen.
Yeah, exactly. But
yeah,
so
sorry, go ahead.
No, I kind of didn't really answer your question. I don't have much.
Well,
of
there
an
isn't
answer
one. I mean, and I was just hoping, because again, while I'm of the generation where my grandparents served in the Second World War, were that alive at that time, and then so my great grandparents were First World War. So I only hear these things secondhand. I mean, especially now from the First World War. And my great grandfather, who did serve, died 2 years or 3 years before I was born, so I never met him. But again, so you never know how some stories get transmitted. But again, it's unfortunate, but there's some parts of these stories we'll never know.
We'll never know. And from my grandmother's letters, I do have. I'm not sure I could read half of what she wrote. Her handwriting is so hard to read. Jim's was very neat and easy to read, relatively speaking, but hers not so much. So
yeah, it seems pretty easy to read. And you've included some of them in the book, and I'm like reading them, even though you've transcribed all of them, which again is its own feat, because I've had to do so much transcription from things written under duress and in these circumstances myself. And that you did 70 of these is
that was a lot of work.
Yeah.
And I was sort of doing final edits and flipping through. So I had all the pictures or all the letters photographed, and I printed them out, and they're in a binder, yay thick. And I'm flipping through and I realized I missed 3 entire letters. Almost didn't get in the book, but I got them in, and so every single one of the letters that he wrote that she saved is in the book.
Yeah, well, that happens. We miss stuff right until the end. That happens to every historian, so don't feel too bad. But so this is again talking about your grandmother. It's so interesting because you don't see her side. And one thing I did want to ask, because this comes through in the letters, I think pretty much the entire time, if not fairly early. And again, maybe just your impressions on this, not necessarily an answer, but he seems to think, in the way he's writing at least, that he's annoying her. That the way he's writing and the things he's writing about and these kinds of things. So if you have any thoughts into that, that comes, I couldn't not notice that, it just kept happening.
Yeah, I think he was kind of, he was a very nice looking young man, and he was very athletic, and seemed to be very popular. But despite being, having all of these wonderful things, he also seemed a little insecure. There he is, and handsome man. I think he was a little insecure, and to be honest, and Jim mentions this in his letters, they didn't actually spend a lot of time physically together. They went skating once, they went canoeing once, they went to a few dances. Sounds like he went to her house for tea or something before he left in May to go to Edmonton.
Mm-hmm. He talks about that frequently.
But most of their relationship was online, so to speak. By letters. And he was 20, 21. You're really insecure and unsure about the other person, and it's those same anxieties that teenagers and 20-year-olds have today. Am I bothering them? Do they really like me? Do they say they like me, but maybe they don't really like me, and maybe she's just being nice, and so it's kind of a cute little romance happening, and then it seems like at some point she finally does say I love you, and he's just
he just seems to that just did him in. He probably fell over in the trench when he read that. I mean, that's because that's one of the things I didn't want to say, and for those watching this part of the book, it's I think it speaks to how much humanity is the same over time.
Mm.
These are emotions that I'm sure all of us or most of us have gone through at some point, especially being that age. I mean, it does come through, these anxieties, like you said, and all these worries. And it's so funny because, like you said, this is the online talking, but he's talking to her sister because they went to school together, talking to, well, unfortunately, and another character that is mentioned throughout these letters is I don't know, I think he was a private, but Murray Southgate, if I'm remembering his name correctly.
He was a private as well.
He was in another battalion at Second and unfortunately he was killed. But they don't know this, right? They don't learn this until, like you said, he's not declared dead until much later. But they're keeping in communication about him because they also grew up with him or they went to school with him. And so it's just all these different things. But you add this element of a world war on top of all of this. And of course, that's different. I mean, for us, we haven't been through that. But to me, that's what's just so interesting is the things that stay the same than the things that change. But again, that was what just stuck out to me.
One of the doctors I work with, his son was, I think, 18 when the book finally was finished, and he had pre-purchased one of my books. I did a Kickstarter to get some money for editing and that sort of thing. So he took the book home, and his 18-year-old son immediately grabbed it and went off to his room and read the whole thing. And he said, it's his 18-year-old son could relate to this young man very well. It was kind of like emailing to his girlfriend and this sort of thing. So, it is kind of a universal,
experience.
They were the same as,
just that's what comes through to me is we're all the same
in some ways, and yet in other ways, here's Jim talking about the federal election of, I'm not sure what the year was, and they would have been 15, 16, 17 years old, and they were having a big party because the conservative Borden got elected. Well, he was from Halifax, but how many 16 or 17-year-olds party because whoop, whoop, the prime minister they wanted got in.
Probably not happening much anymore, but it's just that's the part that I thought was I guess that's right. We're the same, but we're different in some respects. It's like that's such a weird detail to include, especially because I get why, but I mean because it's the local connection. I think is a big part of it. Yeah, and I mean Nova Scotia was pretty proud that they had another prime minister. There's been a few.
And I think Borden had visited maybe the trenches or something at that time.
Oh
yeah,
so he had. No, I don't think at this point yet, but that's a whole other kind of side thing. But yes, he did visit the trenches. He visited them in the hospitals, and that kind of led to a whole thing with conscription, and Vimy Ridge is connected to all that. But that's another. I did a conscription show, so that's for that show. You guys can check that out if you're interested in that. We'll talk about that. But it's so interesting to me that these details come in. And out of all of this, the conditions that we already talked about, that's the one thing you wanted to write about. That you were so happy that in this, talking about your grandmother, that Borden won, you were so happy. And to me, it's just, that's, I think, it's so endearing in so many ways. That these tiny little details that you wouldn't think matter or that anyone would remember or care about are getting included. And to me, that's so interesting. It so sticks out. And I mean, and we can maybe move towards the end here of the book, at least, is like we already talked about, his attitude seems to shift a little bit. I mean, one thing I did notice, again, I think because he's such a deep character, I guess is the only way, because we don't know this man. We only know him from these things. His character seems like he's got lots of layers to him. Is at the beginning of the letters, and he's talking about the different names he has for her, and he closes his letters all the same way and all that. He's not using the word love at first.
No.
Towards the end, he is. Yeah. And we don't know, right? We don't know what your grandmother said, but she must have said it as well because he mentions that. Like it's so funny. He's like alluding to it, and then he eventually just starts saying it.
Yeah.
Again, it's all speculative, but I just wondering if you had any thoughts on that too, because I think this comes around the time of his death too. So to me,
I really think I think she was a bit of a lifeline for him. I think he was clinging to her. He wrote to a lot of people.
Yeah,
And, he had other young women writing to him, which seemed to make my grandmother a little jealous. But I really think she was, his lifeline to normalcy, to home, to everything he missed. So as things got worse as time went on, as maybe he got more and more depressed, he was losing friends, and and so she was kind of that shining light that was the one good thing in his life.
And it seems that, I mean, again, this is all just my own conjecture, but it just seems like the war, I mean, obviously he had strong feelings for her from the beginning, because that comes through when you're reading between the lines. But towards the end, he's just outright saying it. I have to assume that's the war that did that, because what else has changed? He hasn't seen her. He hasn't seen her in years.
No. Years.
Yeah, and
he's barely seen her. He's barely seen her at all.
He's barely seen her. Period. Yeah. Like they barely. Well, they talk about, like, he talks about this constantly in the letters, which I think it's kind of sweet. He's talking about, like, the last time we met, and you remember that time. You probably don't remember that time. Again, I think it's part of that insecurity that comes through. Which, again, he's a human. We all have this, but it's just to me, it's again, it's so unique. You don't get this in this way in the letters that I've seen, or you get snippets. You don't get this sort of progression.
When it's very much, and that's why, when I had read the letters all out of order, it was kind of, they were interesting, but it wasn't until you read them all in order, and you just watch this relationship develop. You watch him develop as a person in not always good ways, mentally for him. But he was, I found him so interesting. He claimed he was, wasn't too bright. He claimed, he was wasting, he was made a comment. He was sort of jealous that she was in school. She was learning, she was exercising her mind, and he was wasting his brain and forgetting everything he'd ever learned. And, he wasn't good at school, but, he's quoting, I am, and he's quoting Shakespeare. And, but I just, I think he was watching kind of his life slip away, and sort of, in a way, I think. And,
it's hard to say, because obviously we know where it's going to go, and it's going to have its heartbreaking ending. But again, and I was talking to you about this before we started, how I've just finished a couple of hours before we jumped onto the stream here, and I was reading this, and obviously I know what's coming, because I was doing research on him separately and getting those links and everything together. But I'm like, something feels like it's coming.
Yeah.
And this is common. First World War, especially. Fatalism is in every book you're going to read about any of this stuff that talks about, the experience and the meaning behind war and all that stuff. But this is a case where it kind of comes out of almost seemingly, and it doesn't when you think back upon it, but almost out of nowhere. He's so optimistic. He's always talking about what they're going to do when the war is over, when he's coming home, when they finally get to be together. But he never comes home. And he's still, like so many Canadians, he's still on Flanders fields to this day. And it's heartbreaking. It is heartbreaking. I mean, you wouldn't be here if he had not been killed. But it's hard to think about.
Or I might have had a different last name. Who knows?
But, or be slightly different. I don't know. Because again,
he had dark hair. He had dark hair and dark eyes. So,
Well, because mine's not quite the same, because I don't know the details, but I found out when I was a bit older that my mother's mom had a similar situation. She had a fiance killed in the Second World War. We never talked about it. Talked about it one time. I said something stupid when I was young about the war or something, and she snapped at me. It was the only time she had ever snapped at me in my entire life. Because I found out she had a fiance killed. And I had no idea, and she never talked about it. So I mean, it's so heartbreaking to hear these things.
It's hard for us to imagine our grandmothers or grandfathers being young, being, having these kind of romances. And it's almost inconceivable what those, the generations, my grandparents' generations, your grandparents' generation, the Second World War, to think what they went through and to, know that family is going off to war and they might not come back, and they, there's a good chance they won't come back, and those losses. And I'm doing some research. I kind of have an idea in my head of doing a book on the war dead from my particular city. And there were 11 men from St. John, New Brunswick, who were killed at Vimy, which is a lot for one rather small town in a way. So 11 families got a telegram in the days, and it's hard for us to imagine that happening now. It's really hard to imagine.
Yeah. I mean, that's one thing that gets talked about often is especially the casualty rates at the beginning, or when the big battles happen. Second is the shock, right, to Canada. All of a sudden, all these names start coming, and people piece it together. They're not told what happened, but all of a sudden, all these your neighbors got somebody killed, and everyone goes, something bad happened. But anyway, that's just kind of one of the last points I want to talk about, because you mentioned this in the book, is his date of death isn't a big day. It's not a big battle. There's no mention in the war diary of it. He doesn't even get a mention. Because one thing I have noticed in my own work is towards the beginning of both wars, because I do both, it's when there's a death, especially in the Second World War, but in the first as well, say by accident, or it's an early combat death, it gets a lot of attention. Give it a month or two, nobody seems to care. So, and I think you did a great job with this in that terms of highlighting this, and because that's literally the end of the story, right? Because the letters stop. There's one that's written on the day of his death, which he didn't. Sorry, go ahead.
And it was, I'd read all the letters. I'd read them numerous times. I'd never really looked at the envelopes, and they were in the archives in Fredericton, in the New Brunswick archives. And I've gone up a couple of times because you want to look at the actual document, not my photocopy and whatever.
You're preaching to the choir on that one, yeah.
And just, sometimes it's like I have to go visit Jim and hold his letters. And I looked at that envelope, and I'd read that letter so many times. And I've always, I don't know how many times I've read the letters. And every time when I come to those last 4 or 5 letters, I just go, I've got to stop, because he won't die if I don't read those last letters. But I picked up the envelope and I realized there was no censor stamp on it. There were no stamps. There was no nothing. And it's like he always said, I've got to get this letter finished and get it in. I've got to, I got to do it, get it right in. And
got to follow the rules.
Well, a couple of times he was writing a letter, and then they had to stand to, and the letter got stepped on by his buddy, and he had to start again. And then there was another call out to something. And so it's just like, what did he do? He hadn't gone anywhere. He'd written that letter and he hadn't gone anywhere, done anything, and something happened, and it was catastrophic. His Bible, he had a little New Testament. It was, just a little pocket New Testament. It came to my grandmother, so it came home. He obviously wasn't completely blown up. But what happened to him, it killed him outright. He was, he did not go to an aid station. He did not get to a casualty clearing station. He didn't get any treatment at all. And it just, for a life to be snuffed out that fast, that just, you're fine one minute, you're not the next, is just, that was the war. That happened. He saw that happening to his friends, and now it happened to him, and that's it's gutting. It's really gutting.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have as much work into this, obviously, as you do, not even close. But by the time I come to the end, I'm like I've said before, I know what's coming. I know what's going to happen. I don't know how, but I know it's going to happen. And it's still like I'm tried not to. I didn't cry. I back tears, literally. I don't mind admitting that. So I've done this before with other stories. It was so heartbreaking. I didn't know the circumstances. All of a sudden, I knew he's going to get killed. I didn't know.
My husband cried. My husband cried at the end.
Oh yeah, I mean, I don't know how you can't when you've read this
Yeah.
whole book, and I read it fairly quickly, and I'm just like, I know these people as best as I can. He's gone, and there's all, and then that's another thing. And we all speak to this because we're all now here, but life does continue on, and your grandmother eventually seems like, again, we don't know, but she some way got over this in some way. Like you mentioned that, like she lived with his family, which is, especially for the time period, that might have been a little scandalous, but I mean, it's a little different for especially the time period and that social class and all that stuff, like you mentioned. And it's so interesting to hear all of this. But again, his death and that the letter was found on him is because that's noted, and that often gets noted, is heartbreaking. But you don't often get to see the letter, right? Like I said before, I've gone through I don't know how many files, and they're like, oh, there was a letter on them. Doesn't say what the letter was. This time we know.
Yes, we know.
And it's just like I said, and again, I can't speak for your opinion or what actually was going on, but it seems like he knew something was coming, and it gets fulfilled in a way.
Yeah, he was down. He was very down that day, and it's like, was he not feeling well? Was he just kind of like, oh, I don't care, and got careless?
Yeah.
Like,
maybe
it's
maybe he made a mistake. That's what happened. We don't know. But again, it's just, you get that sense from reading this. But again, I don't think you get that. Again, this isn't just to trick people into reading the book. I don't think you really get that sense unless you read it all thoroughly, because you get the sense of, if you read it piecemeal or pick and choose, you're like, oh, there's this kind of happy-looking guy who's kind of down on himself a little bit, but he's really in love. You get the sense of this character development, like you said, and it's not always.
He's such a vibrant personality. He's just he leaps off the page.
He does.
And that was some of why I wanted, my cousin was like, how could you put those personal letters out there? She was a little, and I went, this guy had no family. There's nobody, there's no family anywhere. The last I can trace, he had a nephew in Bermuda, and he had no family, and so he would have just disappeared. Absolutely disappeared into kind of that void that so many of the war dead disappear into. And the photograph, I mean, I didn't have a picture of him, and I kind of thought, there's probably something in the newspaper. There's got to be something in the newspaper. And where my great grandfather was the editor of the newspaper, I thought he's surely got to go put something in. And I went over to the archives in Nova Scotia, and I'm going through. I told the archivist what I wanted, and they went, "Oh, well, there are no obituaries. They didn't put pictures in the paper. They didn't do that kind of thing."
Right.
And I went, my great grandfather would have done something. This is his daughter's practical fiance. I almost think he was going to propose if he got home. He had a question he was going to ask her when he got home. I was just like, I bet you. Anyway.
Yeah, sorry, not to stop, cut you off, but that's the heartbreaking part. Because he keeps talking about when we get home, and I get home, what we're going to do. And I want to ask you this, but it's almost like, oh, it can wait. You get that sense, oh, it's okay, I'll ask you later. But one has to assume that's what it was. I mean,
I think so.
Again, it's just, it breaks your heart.
It does. But
yeah, sorry, but yeah, like you said.
Anyway, so I went through. I mean, you've probably gone through microfilm, newspapers on microfilm. Oh, yeah. That's not fun. That is not fun. I do not recommend it. Not fun. Not great, and I've never done it before, and I'm going through going, oh my God, I'm going cross-eyed.
Yep.
And you see these little tiny pictures, and you zoom in. No, that's an advertisement for something. And I'm scrolling through, and I started about. I started on the day he was killed, even though I knew it wouldn't be in the paper for weeks, and I didn't want to miss anything, and I just
I do the same. Yeah.
Just going through, and these wonderful women came over, and they were just like, "Oh dear, don't get your hopes up." And no. Anyway, front page, above the fold, this big article, and there he was, and it was just I cried, because it was like, there's the face of the person I know, and that's all I wanted to do was see a face, put a face to the name, and that's. that's what I've done with the book, is I want to put a face to the name. I want to bring this young man back to life. I want people to remember him. I want, because of the book, I know a fellow in Ypres, and he's now adopted Jim's grave.
Right.
And he had a friend was there from Australia, and he took her to go meet Jim. And, she's become a friend on Facebook. And I had to actually mail the copy of the book to Australia for her. And, so it's just, Jim now has friends all over the world, which is wonderful. But he's just one of many.
Thousands, literally hundreds of thousands. I mean,
yeah.
Well, I mean, I think now he's got some more friends and people who will remember his story by watching this. And again, that's why I wanted to kind of close with here. I think it's a good point to kind of wrap it up. But thank you. I want to say thank you. Honestly, I don't know what other way to say this. Thank you for doing this. I know how difficult this is. I know how non-lucrative it is in all sense of the word, and how thankless it can be to do this. But it is so important. And to understand this, because again, I sometimes get a little, not forgetful, but I do a lot of this stuff, right? And I go through files all the time, and I go through lists of the casualties all the time, and I do, but sometimes I just forget these are whole lives. So to have this for one man is huge. I mean, to me, it's big. I mean, obviously, I'm a historian, I'm biased, but I think you've done a huge service here.
Thank you. And if it prompts people to look into more casualties, all the better.
That's what I'm hoping. That's what's going to be one of my kind of concluding thoughts. Brad's concluding thoughts. It was, no problem. No. I don't have a segment like that. Don't worry about it. I just kind of ramble at the end. But anyway, it's hopefully that it does do that, right? Because this has been done in other circumstances, but you didn't know you had a connection to this man until you read some letters. So who knows what else will come out of the woodwork here. But I think, again, that this is expertly done. I don't mind using that word because, hey, I'm a doctor now. Some people have pointed out, and I can say these things. It's so well done. You talked about the challenges that every historian knows, written something like this knows. So it's just like, it's so great to have you on talking about this, learning about what you went through to get this done, and it's amazing to do. So like I said to everyone, check out the book, get it. For those of you in Canada, I'm not sure if it extends to other countries. It's an e-book, and the link below, so check it out. There's a link for the United States as well, so please do buy the book, because I think people watching this will thoroughly enjoy it and get a lot out of it. So thanks a lot, Heather, for coming on. I really appreciate it. Getting to talk in depth with you. I mean, to me, it's I love talking to authors, because people probably notice I get really excited about these topics, and I like talking to people who did them. And this has been one of the better ones, because we had another one on her. Her great uncle had served in Normandy. So it's Amanda, getting these stories to me is, I feel blessed to get them in that sense, like that people are willing to talk to me. So thanks again.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, of course. Hey, if you're doing more work and you're going to do another book, you got some friends here, so let me know.
Awesome.
And we can do something else. But anyway, I'm just going to do a little to wrap up, and then I'll come say bye to you. All right.
Okay.
So thanks everyone for watching. I really appreciate it. This story obviously means a lot to Heather, and I hope you do check it out. It is really, really, really something important. Now, to end, I do want to say, if you haven't subscribed, please do so. I need subscribers now more than ever, especially. So please tell anyone and everyone. I need as many as I can get to kind of keep this going. And also in the links below, there is a Patreon link to my Patreon account to support me in this work. Been having, full honesty, a rough couple of days with this kind of stuff, because I need a little bit more support to keep doing this. I don't know if I can keep doing this without a little more. I don't know how much longer I can do this for, just to be fully honest to everyone watching. So if you can tell people, if you can throw me a little bit on Patreon, or one time on Buy Me a Coffee, which is also there, please do, because again, I don't know how much longer I can do this, and I don't want to stop, but I might have to, unfortunately, which also makes me kind of sad, but I don't want to, but that's just the fates I've been kind of dealt at this point. So please do support me if you can. It would mean a huge, huge help and anything you can give me. So please, again, and if you like this video, please tell people and share it with them. That would be great. And all the links to the social media is below. So check all that out. And if you're not following already, please do. So thanks again, Heather. Thanks for coming on. I really appreciate it. Did you enjoy coming on the show? It wasn't too hard.
I did. Oh,
perfect. Told you I wasn't.
And I hope everybody supports you. I really do. This is a great show.
Thank you. I do appreciate that. I mean, it's a lot of work, but it's nice to hear that from someone on the show, especially. So thanks again for coming on. We have another live stream coming tomorrow. I've got information all over the place on it. So check it out and come join us tomorrow at 3:00. So I will see everyone tomorrow.